So many people have been speaking about the climate crisis. So many things have been put on paper. But the real question is, why is it that we're still not acting at the scale and speed that is necessary?
The extreme weather events that the scientists have long connected to the climate crisis are becoming far more frequent and far more destructive.
For 150 years, we built up a world based on the assumption that we can exploit the planet for free, and it translates to very dramatic impacts happening right as we speak.
The climate crisis is a threat multiplier, which means it exacerbates existing inequities in our society. The impacts are felt most deeply by Black, Indigenous, and communities of color.
We're living through an explosion of inequality. We need to remember we're on the same planet, and this is the planet that we need to make sustainable for the whole of humanity.
Climate change is impacting food security as well as political stability in many nations around the world. 5 years ago, there were 80 million people marching towards starvation. That number jumped to 135 million. What caused the jump? It was man-made conflict, like in Ukraine, compounded with climate shocks.
No one is as vulnerable to climate change as farmers are. If you talk transformation, the first thing they want to know is, what must I do on my farm?
We know that this transition will require a fast adoption of a lot of new technologies. And the question today is how to find the appropriate way to finance this technology.
To put a number around it, it's an extra $2.5 to $3 trillion a year of additional finance that we have to find in order to get those emissions down.
Financial institutions have a lot of roles to play to bring the advice and provide the financing to make these transitions happen.
Younger generations are demanding a sense of purpose. They want to look at companies and say, I am investing with you all for this reason.
With the upcoming 2 COPs taking place in Africa and the Middle East, we have this tremendous opportunity to put emerging markets at the forefront of our collective response to climate change.
For international trade has to be part of the solution. How do we all get together to talk about a global carbon price that can guide us and help us to decarbonize the world?
The solutions are there. What we need is governments to regulate, to invest, and we need business to act with values.
History will look at us, people, politicians, corporate leaders. These times requires not only solutions but speed.
There is nowhere else to look than the mirror. We are the ones that need to do this.
Greetings, I'm Stephanie Rule with NBC News. I'm so excited to be part of this conversation about the future of work. Work, our labor markets in both developed and developing countries, is such an important subject right now. We talk so much about a post-COVID world, a labor shift, a labor shortage, but most importantly, how do we skill and prepare people around the world for the jobs of tomorrow? I'm joined this morning by a very exciting group. Sharon Burrow, Secretary General of the International Trade Union. Alan Blue, co-founder of LinkedIn, which right now in your inbox is probably notifying you of a great job opportunity, letting you know about a college friend that has a much better job than you ever thought they would get. And Isayaki Adekoba, who is the CEO of Recruit Holdings, a platform that connects users and business clients specifically in the areas of life events and lifestyle. And I would say I'm most excited to talk to him about a group he's involved in, the Reskilling Revolution Champions. Welcome. I'm so excited to speak to you all this morning. This is a topic people are worried about, people are excited about all around the world. So I want to start by just getting your thoughts, general thoughts. What are labor markets like right now? Trends. Sharon?
Well, you have to get under the figures. If you read the press, it says that we're in a period of incredible luxury for workers and very difficult times for employers trying to find work. But our global polling shows that 66% of people know of someone who's lost hours or jobs. In fact, almost 50% of people have actually lost hours, working hours, and they're worried about getting a job, a decent job for their children. So you must get under the figures. We have to return to a concept of full employment where central banks pick up their responsibilities for things like climate action and employment systematically. So putting people at the heart of reskilling, people at the heart of actually having decent work, which is underpinned by rights, and of course universal social protection. With all the global shocks you're seeing, then we have no resilience because more than 60% of the world's people have little or no social protection. So they lose a job, they get sick, affected with COVID or other health problems, or they have an accident, or there's some shock that simply makes them unable to work. They have nothing to survive on.
Do you think those figures, you think that reality is understood by people with white-collar jobs, people in developed countries? I mean, even last week when we saw the negotiations around railroad workers, people that worked in railway, people were shocked to understand that the only thing they were fighting for were days off, unpaid days off.
Exactly. Well, you're talking about an American labour market, which I'd hasten to add is even more broken than some of the other developed countries. But if I give you a sense of the global environment, then we have 60% of workers now working informally. No rights, no minimum wage, no rule of law, no social protection. And of the 40%, you have workers like that who actually have insecure or indeed extremely exploitative work where the norms of time, some control over time, decent wages are simply not there. And that's why you're seeing strikes all across the world, because workers are saying we've gone through despair, we're angry, and now we want to do something about it.
Alan, what trends are you seeing?
Well, I can speak a little bit to the white-collar view of this. I mean, LinkedIn, it's a company we serve primarily white-collar workers, and we have 850 million professionals from whom we derive insights about how the labor market is actually working. For us, in the white-collar world, there are three big questions. It's how you work, where you work, and why you work. So how you work...
Are the answers so different today than what they were 3 years ago?
They actually are different. So how you work, the world of hybrid work and remote work has become, I wouldn't quite say the norm, but it's become dominant in the way people are using LinkedIn. So for instance, before the pandemic, we had only about... We had a very small number of jobs which were remote. Now we have 1 in 6 are remote. And the jobs that people apply to the most, more than 50% of our applications go to those remote jobs.
I was just about to say, if 1 in 6 are remote jobs, is it 6 out of 6 people are looking for remote jobs?
3 out of 6. So then the question of where we work. So as the pandemic struck, people moved out of big cities, big expensive places to live, and now have just begun returning to those places.
Just as rents are sky high.
Just as rents are sky high, indeed. And then the why, the question of work-life balance and the question of working for an employer whose values match yours have become something that many people who are looking for jobs consider before even talking to a potential employer. So it is a different space now, and we'll see how it changes in the next 3 years.
Is that the biggest change that you've seen, thinking about the tenure of LinkedIn and looking at employers and employees for years? Let's be honest. We've heard people talking about, I'm looking to work for a company that represents my values, but for a long time, that just sounded like a saying, or you'd see it in the values of a lobby of a building. But in the last 3 years, is that when you've really seen that change?
Definitely really seen that change. And it's being led by what we call Gen Z, so employees who are 25 years old or younger, are people who are really demanding that they know more about where an employer stands in order to be able to make a decision around work. That's not the only thing which makes them different. But certainly in this case, and employers are responding. Employers are responding by not only talking more about the things they believe, but actually understanding that to attract the employees they want, they need to actually change the things they do inside. And the reason is employees are actually not tolerant of whitewashing these things or greenwashing these things in the world of climate like they may have been in the past.
What trends are you seeing?
Yeah, we are Recruit. We're serving roughly 300 million job seekers every month through our services like Indeed.com or Glassdoor.com. And what we're seeing right now is there's a huge gap between white-collar jobs and blue-collar jobs, and also the developed countries and the developing countries globally. And for example, in the U.S., the labor market is very, very tight. We still have, I know everybody is talking about the next recession, but right now we have 11 million open jobs in the U.S.
Why is that?
Because we don't have enough supply of labor force. This is our, I think probably for human beings, this is our first time to see this kind of less labor force supply to the market. And we will have less supply of labor force for the next 10, 20 years. For example, in Japan, we have like literally from 2010 to 2012, 2022, today, 4.5% less prime age working force population. So, and also when we think about the skilled labor force, which is like in the U.S., like baby boomers, there are so many great car technicians or nurses. They are retiring, and we don't have enough pipeline to supply to fill these people who retired. So I think right now what we are seeing is the labor market in developed countries are still very tight, and it will take time to cool down inflation because, again, we still have 11 million open jobs. In 2008, it took 18 months to drop down the number of open jobs from 4.5 million to 2.2 million. It took 18 months.
What's going to start to solve for it, though? If there's simply not enough humans to fill these jobs, 18 months isn't going to do anything.
Yeah, so I just think it takes time to cool down wage inflation and general inflation right now. Of course, I don't think there's a great solution to reskill, retrain younger age, workforce within 18 months in developed countries.
I have to say, that's the world that you two live in. But first of all, if you look at the IMF figures this week, even in this country, the unemployment rates are going to go up. Why? Because of the dominant way that many, they call them dominant companies, actually pay wages. They borrow money, credit overdrafts, etc., to pay wages, and now you've got inflationary spirals, and you can already see in most developed countries the trend for unemployment going up. We're in a period of stagflation. This has nothing to do with wage inflation. That's an old economic argument that's actually a vicious attack on the economy. Because if growth actually is lower than inflation, then you not only have stagflation, you risk recession. And that does mean that, again, even in the environments you're talking about, unemployment rates will go up. But if you look at the rest of the world, we've got migrant workers, millions of migrant workers everywhere. And while there are capacity for soaking up some of that, in many, many countries, whether it's cultural rejection of migrants that's causing the labour market to climb, whether it's lack of skills, there are more than enough people who are desperate for work who simply can't get a job. So from a global perspective, I understand the figures and I know the slice of the market you're looking at in terms of recruitment, but that's not our reality. Far from it.
Or they can't get jobs in the places where there are jobs available. So how does one start to solve for that where you're talking about?
Well, I can tell you in the late 80s and 90s, this tells you how old I am, we used to work for productivity gains with employers that actually meant you got, and we invested those gains through upskilling workers to get the productivity, reinvested them in areas of structured training. I hear people, Alan and I have had this conversation, but I hear people talking about lifelong learning. We were talking about that in the 90s. I sat on the Australian tripartite skills council until 2010 when I left the country. There is no planning for skills systematically in lots of companies today because they want to take...
In companies or countries, did you say?
No, companies, because they want a ready-made workforce. They're learning that that's not the case. But at that higher skilled level, I can tell you the conversations, you must have them with CEOs that say, we can't get skilled workers. And I say, train them. That's a luxury you can solve. And that's why the WEF's reskilling we're all champions of the reskilling revolution. And that's why, because we do have to invest in skills, but we must also be honest about where there's simply no jobs for workers. And the supply chain disasters of today really provide for dehumanising exploitation of work that has to change.
I want to talk about that companies skilling workers or potential workers, because even in the last 5 years, we've started to see with some of larger companies, Salesforce, for example, IBM, Google, really building massive skills training programs for people who aren't even employed by them yet.
So companies, as you might expect, and as you know, are driven by the current most deeply felt pressures on that company. And if you are running a technology organization where basically you're trying to build software, you have faced a shortage of workers for the past 15, 20 years. And during that time, you have considered alternatives that maybe people in manufacturing might not have considered. Because
what do you mean?
Training your own workers is the only way to build the supply of people you need in order to be able to build the software. So you consider things like, how do we publish our courses online? How do we do online certifications? How do we bring people from all around the world? Technology companies, because they have faced this deficit for so long, are considering this. And that's true right now because, as you were saying, we have basically a labor shortage in this particular kind of job, these more easily skilled jobs. So companies are embracing training now. The question is, in 3 years, we don't really know. I think in technology, the deficit will still be there. But in other places, will the companies still be feeling the pressure to build their own? There is, for what it's worth, one, I think, highlight in the future, if we want to call it that. It has to do with climate change and preparing companies to manage the transition to sustainability. For the most part, that is not going to come by the creation of a gigantic number of new types of jobs. What it's going to come from is retraining the people who are currently doing jobs. Because when we look at green skills, on LinkedIn we've done a bunch of skills and how jobs change over time. This is work we've done with the forum. What happens is of its skill mix will change. So that
what skills are needed to
exactly.
complete that job?
So if you are a supply chain manager right now, the supply chain manager you need to be in 5 years is going to have 10 more things you need to know how to do and 10 things you no longer do. So those transformations in each job are transitions that companies need to help their employees make. And that's going to be widespread because almost every company is going to have to make substantial shifts in order to be able to address sustainability.
And part of the issue is that blue collar, white collar. I've seen this shift twice in big systemic shifts in my working lifetime. Once was in the 90s when I had previously been a teacher and people kept telling us that the era of knowledge was here. The big tech booms were on. We were all going to be knowledge workers. There'd be no more blue. We used to say, wait, just wait. Aren't you going to graft new skills onto the existing workforce because it's still the same industry, which is exactly what happened. And now, Alan's right, but if you take clean steel, for example, a company like SSAB in Sweden, where my own deputy president became a senior advisor because we were working with the company to transition because of climate. And they won't have less jobs, they'll have more jobs, but it's in the fuel mix that is actually no longer based on carbon but on hydrogen. And so you've got that different skill set, but it is, Alan's right, it's 30%. You go from things like combustion engines, generators for coal-fired power stations to actually, solar, thermal solar engines. It's, again, a tweak. And then some are very different skills. So it is about building that just transition, we call it, where you protect and grow jobs. And our challenge is to the fossil fuel industry, because they have the capex, the asset base, the technology and the workforce, but they are not shifting fast enough to stabilise the planet. And they could do it by protecting their current workforce and retraining them. So these are the challenges. We say every industry has to transition, and that means it's not just green skills, it's that you're using cleaner technologies.
Are we not making these transitions simply because we live in a world politically, socially, economically, in a world of short-termism, where these type of solutions, this reinvestment, is about long-term goals? And if you look at your average CEO out there of a Fortune 500 company or a small business, they can't work with long-term goals because they have got to focus on quarterly results.
That is a great point. I think, for example, like most of developed countries are having like less immigrant workers. We know that when we think about the labor shortage right now in many countries, like in the U.S., like in 2015, we had more than 1 million surplus of immigrants, and 2021, last year, we had 270,000 surplus of immigration. And as you said, like we need to train them to be the next, great workers. And I think, of course, the technology, engineering type of skills, we need to train people, but also, for example, like healthcare workers or construction workers or car technicians, which now it requires to fix electric vehicles, or like like these basic physical jobs, maybe you can say like blue-collar jobs, but we still need a lot of essential workers. We realized in the COVID-19 situation, we need it, but we kind of forgot to train them to feed these people to be the next generation to support our society. So I think you're right, I think all CEOs need to have a long-term view to keep the society to be a better place.
Is immigration reform the clearest way to unlock this? Not that it's a solve, but when you talk about supply and demand, there are a whole lot of people that we're simply not letting in the country right now.
That is a really difficult topic for probably all politicians. I don't want to touch too much about that, but for example, not only in the US, like UK, Australia.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
And we can't solve the refugee, migrant demand now because of our cultural pushback in many countries. And yet, look at Pakistan. You go next door, Bangladesh has got 30 million people less than half a metre above sea level. The climate refugees that could reach 100 million by 2050 or 60, what are we going to do? And yet they're the global workforce, and they're human beings. And we have to get over this xenophobic view that somehow one group of people's okay and another group isn't. I see very generous people. And the Ukraine refugees, getting refugees out of Afghanistan, part of my role, people have been very generous. But there's a short-termism in that generosity. And then the old myth comes back that they're stealing our jobs and so on, which is economically nonsense. But it is that fear that lies there, and it's a fear of not having a good job, your child not having a good job. So we have to reset the way we think about it. And I'm thinking about Kaizen. I don't know if you remember the Japanese philosophy, but go back to the Great Revolution in Japan, Industrial Revolution in Japan after World War II. They used to have, right up until about the 80s, a philosophy of Kaizen where they trained every one of their workers constantly. They might only use 20% of the skills, but they figured that they were investing because that 20% gave them the industrial edge. And we've got to do that now with the augmented workforce, which the WEF is really on top of with CEOs, because again, those technicians who fix your car, your electric vehicle, are going to be computer technicians more than they are mechanics.
Then do we need to revisit what we define as a good job? Because just a moment ago when you were talking about your life as a teacher, this idea that we're not going to have blue-collar jobs anymore, right around that time is when we saw vocational training, vocational schools really get wiped out and this huge focus only on higher learning. And now we have scores of people taking 6 or 8 years to get out of community colleges with degrees that don't align with the jobs of today or jobs of tomorrow. So do we need to really think about what is a good job? What are the skills we need for that good job? And maybe even dispel this notion that without a college degree, there's no job out there for you, because there are a lot of jobs.
So it's some of the work that the WEF has been doing, and then we've been working on the reskilling revolution, and something that basically allows us to hopefully build a broadly adopted taxonomy of skills which allow greater visibility between education and employment. So the WEF has pulled that group together, and there are a lot of people out there coming from all different directions who are trying to make that possible in order to close that gap. We also need to think, and this is somewhat to Sharon's point, about who those good jobs go to. You know, at LinkedIn we have spent a bunch of time thinking about equity in hiring. We know, for instance, that the pandemic very substantially impacted women workers more than it did men. And even though we've seen a rebound there, we see more women founders, and we're seeing, you know, it's sort of a return to parity, we've lost many years of progress towards equity in the workforce. One of the questions for us is, how do we make sure that even with the system that we have right now, that it can be distributed more equitably across a broader number of people? You've heard of the old story of the orchestra, which would basically only bring on men until they did their interviews behind a curtain, so they couldn't tell who was playing. There's reality to a skills-based approach, actually observing what skills a person has as a way of breaking down barriers around equity. Now, there's more to it than that, to be clear, but if we have a taxonomy of skills that we can use, and educators can actually pay attention to it, and employers are taking advantage of that and making their hiring decision based on what a person can do rather than where they come from, or worse yet, what they look like, those good jobs, in fact all those jobs, can be more broadly and equitably distributed.
But then here's a different challenge. If you're going to focus on skills rather than who the person is, what happens if now the employers are charged with giving employees their skills? How do you recruit? Who do you recruit from?
So in terms of skills, I think we started to distribute more like online technology skill tests or online even interviews, and there are a lot of small businesses globally. They started to use our online tests, and we have finished millions of tests so far. It will also feed the machine learning to automate some the test. But I think when we think about the good job or good work, I think we need to redefine the, okay, white collar job, technology jobs is a cool job or good jobs, and blue collar jobs are dirty and I don't want to do it. I think that is probably wrong. As I said, like, as a society, we need a lot of essential workers to live a better life. And, we probably...
But then that's a psychological change. That's a cultural change.
I think that both. We need to evaluate these. For example, I was talking about the school bus driver shortage problem in the US, probably in the UK and many countries. And we know, okay, school bus driver jobs will be gone in, I don't know, 20, 30 years, automating driving car.
But haven't we been saying that for a while, right? Pre-pandemic, I can tell you we did all these stories on what are we going to do about the American bus driver, that predominantly white, non-college educated male who has made a career of being a long-haul truck driver. His job is being taken away by robots. As soon as the pandemic hit, what was one of the first shortages we saw? Truck drivers. We didn't have enough truck drivers. So do we get ahead of ourselves or overly dramatic with this idea that these jobs are getting automated when we still see a huge demand for many of these traditional jobs?
And for as long as we can see, they might not actually have a steering wheel, but you're still going to need a person for safety, for trust, for passenger comfort, etc. in all of those circumstances. On a manufacturing floor, I again saw people get very excited about how it would be fantastic to have totally automated workforces in many areas, on the docks, in factories, etc. It's still a thing of science fiction, and it should probably be remaining there. The challenge is not are you going to use technology, it's is the technology good for your business, and is it indeed suitable for human beings to interface with? Because it is. I mean, digitalisation we call the tram tracks, but in fact it's all of those technologies that workers have to use now to do their jobs. So it's just part of the mix. But you do need the skills, and you need people to be more open to taking, I mean, most human beings can learn. You just need to have that common, kind of commitment to taking a worker and to training them. And that's what I think we have to get back to. Yesterday I sat in a real live discussion on a board here in the UN with the UN Global Compact, and we talked about the fact that workers, particularly young workers, come in, they leave after a couple of years because they don't have a sense of security in an employment market. So they are constantly looking for more security or more wages or whatever. So the churn is because the jobs don't feel secure to individuals. And somehow we have to get back to what Alan said. What's the culture, if it's in the technological field or wherever, where workers will come, they'll learn, and they'll stay, not forever, but to make a serious contribution.
I think that now, what we are working on is the workplace transparency. That is very important. What I'm saying is, as you said, one more payday off, 2 more payday offs is, they should have it, I think. But just 10 years ago when we, had Indeed job listings, just 5% of Indeed job listings had some kind of salary information. It was, you need to apply to have interviews to know how much they're going to pay. That is extremely unfair, right? But now we pushed a little, really hard, and now almost 80% of job listings on Indeed is having salary information. And I think it's pushing, and it's not only salary or pay transparency. Workplace transparency is very important. How many, what kind of benefit, or how many payday off they're getting. It's still so many employers, they don't want to disclose it. So I think transparency is very important thing. For example, on Glassdoor, we're sharing a bunch of reviews about, CEOs or work environment and blah, blah. Some employers didn't like it.
Of course not.
I get it as a CEO. I don't want to get complained. But I think it's very important to be transparent as all leaders or CEOs or, who's running a company. And again, I was just talking about the US, but when we think about the global, there are so many countries still like, 2012, 10 years ago-ish, US situation. There's so many employers, they don't want to disclose anything before people applying jobs. So I think the transparency is very powerful thing.
I really love that you brought that up, because it takes us back to one of the first things you were talking about with those Gen Z workers and their demands. Because oftentimes we roll our eyes, we complain about younger workers and their demands. We act as though, my goodness, they're unreasonable, they're divas. But when Daco just walked through some of what these demands are, my God, they feel really basic. Please post approximately what the salary is. Please give me an idea what management is like, what my actual benefits. So rather than just these demands, is what we're seeing a shift where employees or potential employees are simply saying all of the power can't reside with the person who writes the paycheck? Isn't that a more equitable balance of power that would be good for everyone in the end?
Well, at LinkedIn, we certainly think so. I mean, in a lot of ways, the company was founded on this idea that there was actually a shift occurring in terms of the balance between the worker and the employer, that the worker was becoming more powerful in that equation. I want to highlight one way that workers are already more powerful, and then talk about how we might be able to make that last. So workers are clearly more powerful in the sense that because there is more information available, as these workers, especially these Gen Z workers, see it, they demand that accountability, that transparency from companies more and more often. But companies are extremely rational. I would say I've rarely met a successful company, one is actually able to continue over time, that doesn't make good, solid, rational decisions. Not always the right ones, but good, rational decisions. I find that for things like climate, I think we got to give some companies some credit for the work they've actually been doing in this space. Part of it is driven by pressure that they feel. So I remember talking 4 or 5 years ago to European energy producers who were coming to us and talking to us about the need to transform their workforce to be able to deploy hydrogen rather than deploying natural gas, because they saw what was coming down the line. They also felt pressure from regulators. They were like, hey, regulators are out there, they're going to put some pressure on me. I got to be ready to deal with that.
But this is economic pressure, because Gen Z kind of gets this brand that it's just social do-goody pressure.
Yep.
What you're talking about is economic pressure these CEOs are facing so they can have sustainable businesses, not so they can get the cool kids to work there.
However, we have a system where you have workers who have a voice, differing volumes for different kinds of industries. You've got companies, and you've got government and regulation, and sort of setting up the expectations for companies. It is possible, I believe, for workers to be able to essentially say, we need more help from regulation, from government, to be able to make sure that things like transparency become a reality. When companies see that pressure actually appearing, they will make rational decisions around regarding that pressure. Having gone through that, now, I agree with you. It's not a sure thing.
No, but I want that company, and there are some. Let me, I'm a co-chair of the B team. I work with very good employers, but I can tell you, when you're sitting here talking about that demographic, I just have to say to you, Starbucks. Ask any young worker who works at Starbucks, and no amount of pressure. They're on strike all across the country. But what's Starbucks doing? Shutting branches, rejecting any kind of collaboration at work, decent wages, whatever. Amazon, I'm sorry, but we have the hugest problem for Amazon workers. The rate of occ health and safety, the pressure on working time, the targets that make it inhuman. So you hear all those stories about throwing packages over the fence. It's not because the drivers are inhuman, it's because they've got targets to actually meet. We do want what you say, and we talk to our people about, we have actual action days called KAPOW, Climate and Employment Proof Your Workplace. And the message is, invite your CEO to indeed have a cup of tea, come and talk to you, work together to get the scale on climate change, on decent work. But I met a young man 3 days ago in a bagel shop, and he's just started working for a major asset manager, actually out of my country. And he's not even seen, he's a new recruit at a highly skilled level, not even seen, let alone met his manager, his New York manager. And I just think, well, that's not a human workforce, in my view. at least just a hello or welcome or something, or leave a message on your desk if you're not there. But he was happy to have the job, but I don't think he saw it as somewhere where he could take himself to work. And that's what we want to do, 100% human at work, because it's the workplace you two are talking about. But it's so rare, sadly, in a macro statistical.
But take us back to that bagel shop, because that bagel shop today is having the hardest time they've ever had to find workers. Because in that town where that bagel shop is, there might be an Amazon distribution center.
Sure.
There might be a Walmart one. And as we talk about those big companies optimizing their workers and the jobs are getting harder and harder for those workers, lower skilled workers would still rather shift to an Amazon where they can start at $17 an hour and get benefits and know their schedule,
absolutely,
rather than in the service industry. So how does this trickle down to those independent businesses, those small businesses, the pizzeria, the dress shop in the same town where that Amazon warehouse is? That main street is going out of business fast.
Absolutely, and it's tragic because they aren't decent work jobs. You don't have rights, you don't have control over working hours. You go to that bagel shop, fantastic product. But I always have a bagel when I come to New York because it just seems like it's a tradition you have to do. But
and pizza for lunch.
No, can't go that far. Sorry. And so but you look at the work they do. It's hard work. It's harder work in terms of time pressure, constant time on task than actually a mechanic that's sitting behind a computer analysing what's wrong with an electric engine. It's just the reality. So if you're going to get that $3 extra and you're still going to be maltreated in many ways, you're going to go get it, of course.
How does all of this trickle down to the millions of small businesses who can't offer these things that the bigger companies, while they're not ideal, can? It's bad.
That's the toughest question. If I have an answer, I would do it. But it seems, and on the other hand, like Japan, which is so regulated, you can fire people. That's, right now they're having a lot of problem because there's still like Italy, there's so many small businesses, which is almost becoming to be like zombie type of situation with the, government money. So the small businesses can exist, but they cannot even increase the minimum wage because it's very tough to survive.
Because no one wants to pay $8 for a bagel.
So on the other hand, like U.S., okay, capitalism, okay, go capitalism. Then as you said, small businesses will be, are being killed by big enterprise type of companies which are paying more. And I haven't found the great answer, but probably there will be somewhere in the middle, and I hope we can find it.
But if you regulate minimum wages on an evidence base about what people need to live, it becomes the base of the economy. And ironically, Henry Ford said it, centuries ago, decades ago. But he said if your workers can't earn enough to buy your product, then you're going to go out of business. And small business, yes, at the moment it's so competitive. But if you look at the evidence, paying a living wage actually keeps retail alive, keeps services alive, because people can afford to participate in the economy. So we get it backwards, really. We look at the cost and not look at the potential for stability and growth. And not to mention the dignity of decent work, which is, of course, my field. But, I just think we have to rethink the economic base and put people and planet at the heart of new business models that will in themselves give you virtuous growth. Right now, we're triggering the seeds of our own destruction, whether it's lack of scale on climate, which we all agree on, whether it's indeed exploitation and price gouging in the energy markets. We have to think about what's good for people and what's good for the planet and the economy. And then we will create new business models.
As we are, as you put it, planting the seeds of our own destruction, which is a rough way, but a brutally honest way to look at it. Are we getting any better, right, as we look to the future? If you think about the conversations you're having, the work that you're doing right now, is it catching on more? Is it more productive than it was 5 years ago, or worse as we look ahead?
I think the workforce is becoming more distant to the work that they do. There's not the same sense of, it's not loyalty, it's more an attachment to the work. No, it's not everybody. A lot of people have jobs
work,
that are
not stakeholder
satisfying.
work.
But most work for the majority of the world's population is to survive. It's to go to work, and if you happen to get a job that actually has some satisfaction in it, or you like the people, that's a bonus. But I do think that we all have to be conscious of the human factor, or we are going to actually simply rue the day. None of us wants our children or grandchildren to work in exploitation, and yet come with me through the supply chains. Dehumanising exploitation doesn't have to be like that. This week there's a UN, well, it's the Secretary General's already championed it, but we'll advance it this week. There's a global UN Global Accelerator on jobs. We need, the UN Sec General says 400 million new jobs. We say 575. We'll take it and raise him. And they, in the formal economy, we need to formalise 1 billion jobs, and that's only half of the informal workers. And we need to do them so they're climate-friendly jobs with just transition measures, and you need to put the resilience of social protection. Now, if the world got together and worked on that as a business foundation, the other thing I'd say is I feel sorry for businesses right now in this country. In other words, the people trying to do the right thing, in dialogue with their workers, working with people like me, and what are they getting? Some bizarre attacks on woke capitalism. Like, that is just bizarre. So these CEOs and their managers are human beings trying to create human workforce, human workplaces, and they're under attack. We have to do something about that. That's just nonsense if we want to change the world so it is friendly for people and for planet.
I know we're out of time, but I want to just quickly wrap up with two of you. Take me to the future in what LinkedIn does, what it studies, because all this talk of transparency and a more equitable workplace sounds like a net positive. Almost, I wouldn't say a silver lining of COVID, but in all that we've experienced or learned from COVID, is it making employers more educated and prepared, and workers start to better understand where and how they want to work and live?
So it is. Whether we're sharing the information or whether they're getting it from each other, whether two CEOs are speaking to each other, there's a lot more visibility into what it takes in order to be able to build a successful workplace. But there's also a lot of information for individuals who are deciding what they want to do with their careers. Now, it doesn't cover everybody by any means, but for those who take advantage of the information, they find themselves in a different position with their employer than they have in the past. And I think that's good for both sides.
This transparency that we're talking about, while many employers are balking at it, is it going to make for a better working environment in the future for all?
I believe so. I believe so. I definitely believe so. And, when we think about long-term trend, almost all developed countries will have less worker supply. So the workers will be more very important, precious, resource for most of employers. So employers have to improve workplace or pay situation to get workers. So I think we're gonna push more about the transparency, and job seekers will be smarter with technologies to run which employers have good jobs or good environment of workplace. So I believe so, and we're going to push it.
We're going to end on that positive note. Taco, Alan, Sharon, thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining us this morning. And to the WEF team, thanks for including all of us.